So in my last couple of videos that I posted, I was kind of trying to get into and talk about things having to do with perception. Perceptions are like this area that I'm really very focused on in the last few years, because I think that it makes up most of who we are. Like, where we kind of think of ourselves in different kinds of ways, and our inner world, I think, makes up 95% of ourself. And I think it's just the way that it's structured, the way that the Kabbalah describes that it's structured, is that your perceptions are the root. They're the layer right outside yourself. Your core self is, you. And then right on top of that, the first layer of the tools you use to do things in the world is your perceptions. In Kabbalah, that's called Midas HaKeter. Midat HaKeter, Keser, however you want to phrase, whatever accent you want to put on that. So, and then your perceptions kind of lead into the kinds of thoughts you're going to have, and that then forms your emotional world. And that's 95% of how you experience your life, is those things. And then, of course, there's the outside level that we all experience of you. Things that we see on the outside are just, the shell that is expressing the underlying perceptions, emotions, and thoughts. So it's really very central. And if you can kind of get in touch with your perceptions and start to figure out, what they are, you can really figure out how to be more effective and just better at doing things. And we talk about growth, and like, we want to change or we want to grow, like everyone in the world. Every year we have New Year resolutions and all kinds of thought processes like that about how we wish we could change some of our bad habits, but you cannot really change things on a more superficial level. If you try changing just your thoughts, or you just try changing your feelings, or even just try changing your actions, so maybe you'll have a short-term result, but if you don't change the underlying perceptions, so then you won't really find any long-term change. And if you do change underlying perceptions, then you'll find that it completely filters and trickles down into everything else that you do. How you feel about yourself, how you feel about what it is that you're doing, how you think, what kinds of thoughts you think about, and also how you behave and how you act and how you live in your life and in the world. So it's really very central. I just kind of want to give a couple of examples that I think really highlight the application of this principle of how central perceptions really are. And one has to do with dealing with other people, which is where we all know that, like, when we first meet somebody, so it's you kind of develop a certain way of seeing them. And it's always very funny, actually, if you look at this in the reverse way, to take a very close friend of yours and try to remember what it was like when you first met them. Because when you first met them, and the way you thought about them and the way you saw them is just so different than the way you see them now that you're so close and that you've been friends for years, let's say. And what that is that when you first meet somebody, so your perceptual lens of them is starting to form, and you're working with very, very small amounts of information. And so it goes from 0 to 100 in, like, a couple of get-togethers, a couple of, hangouts with this new friend. And so you really get to know them, like, in certain kinds of ways that are almost warped, because you're getting exposed to them only in certain things. That's why we say if you want to get to know somebody, you should try to see them in different contexts, so you can really round out and balance out, almost make your perception of them more reality oriented. So, and that's just, just sort of shows you how the way that you know them when you first meet them and the way that you relate to them much later on really changes a lot, because your perception of them changes, and based on the way you perceive them, you'll decide how to talk, how to behave with them, what kinds of things will you bring up in conversation, what kinds of jokes will you make, what kinds of body language will you use. It will really all depend on your perception of them and your perception of your relationship with them. So that just, if you want to work on a relationship with somebody, you first need to kind of start to detect, how do I see them and how do I see my relationship with them? And if you can kind of get in touch with that and tinker with it and realize maybe you don't see them fully and there's other things you could see about them, so then you could actually start to change the way that you deal with them and interact with them. Very important with children, by the way, because with children, when we have our own kids, we tend to be blinded to who they become as they grow older, because we're so used to seeing them as they were when they were little. One last example, which I think is slightly a different category, but just as important, is when you're learning the Chumash. See, when you're learning the Chumash, the problem is that, again, we learn the Chumash when we're younger, and we really we have all kinds of perceptions, really, of the underlying meaning of the words that we're learning. It's exactly the same type of thing as when you're getting to know a person, because when you're quote learning a person, so then what happens is you have certain understandings or certain perceptions of the ways that they act, which you interpret in a certain way based on your perceptions. So you will then have habituated ways of dealing with them. The same thing is true with the Chumash. You read a word like the word Kedusha or the word Emunah or whatever words that are out there, and we have certain perceptions of what those words mean, and we just go with them, and we just, we don't listen so much to what the text is saying, so much as listening to what we used to think about it in the past. Same way as what we do with people. We don't listen to what they're saying necessarily. We listen more to what our perceptions are of them and how we tend to habitually think about them and what boxes we put them into. So with the Chumash, it's very, very powerful, because if you can start to unlock the meaning of words in a real way, instead of just, interpolating your own perspective on words into the text, you can actually pull out meanings of the words and understand what they really mean from, what they mean in context. And so just as a simple example, the word emuna is a great one, because the word emuna is commonly translated as faith. But we talk, do you have emuna? Do you have faith? Do you have faith in God? Well, I know this is going to sound a little dramatic maybe, but we don't have a concept in Judaism of faith the way that it usually is understood by people. There's no blind faith. There's no belief in God in the sense of, we have to just believe something which we cannot prove or anything like that. We're talking about a much more sophisticated construct when we talk about Hashem than just God and some guy that we have to believe in. And if you don't believe in him, you're going to have some kind of awful burning punishment or something like that. There's no blind faith in Judaism. And so the word emunah never meant faith. In fact, if I wanted to just throw a wrench into the works of that definition, I'll just throw out the quick definition now, which is the word emunah you could translate most accurately as it is an external expression that is loyal to an internal vision. So that means that the way that you behave on the outside is loyal to the way that you see the world on the inside. And we have to discuss what that means and how that works and whatever, but it explains many things. Like, for example, when the text says in Megillas Esther that Mordechai is omein es Hadassah, so the word emunah there, that he's omein her, it's exactly the same root, and it means there that he is teaching her, he's indoctrinating her, he's raising her as a child, and he's giving over a whole way of seeing things. And that inner vision is now going to be expressed as her lifestyle as a grown-up person. And that's why we tend to stick to the way that we were taught when we were young. We live that way on the outside when we're older, because that is our internal blueprint. And the word uman, which means an artisan, is someone who has an internal vision of what he wants to create, and he expresses that through his artwork on the outside. That's what art is all about. That's why it's called umanut. That's what the word means. So these words can start to cause contrast that we can really use to think about the definitions of the broader words, instead of having very shallow debates about whether or not do you have emunah, that you have to work on your emunah, when the underlying perception of what that word even means is very, very shallow, or maybe very misunderstood, depending on how we perceive it. And if we explore that and get to know it in a new way, it can really enhance and change the way that we actually live. Because once our perceptions start to change or reshape or reform, then they can actually lead to a completely different way of actually being on the outside. So I think there's a lot to think about with that in terms of applications of perceptions and what they can do in our lives.